Len was misdiagnosed and drugged. I'll read a few bits of his true story. Leonard Lawrence was a fully fit and experienced commercial airline pilot. He'd been working for British Aerospace since 1989 when he experienced and recorded his first fume event. The presence in the plane's onboard air system of toxins. In the most serious cases, these toxins contain organophosphates identical to those responsible for the deaths and brain damage among agricultural workers. Research was conducted on behalf of the US Air Force and early warnings were given in 1955 of the neurological dangers of aircraft cabin bleed air. And on the 29th of November 1991, just as his aircraft reached takeoff speed, the flight deck filled with hot, acrid fumes that were so dense it was impossible to see the instruments and the controls and impossible to breathe. Both Len and his captain were blinded at the time with the fumes as their eyes and skins were burning. The aircraft began to ascend at over 160 miles an hour. Only willpower and long experience enabled the captain to feel his way among the instruments for the dump valve control, which would evacuate the contaminated air from the aircraft cabins. The incident was over in about 15 seconds, and both pilots soon regained their eyesight, enabling them to commence emergency mayday procedures with air traffic control and safety achieve an emergency forced landing. Now, this led to poor old Len here. Welcome to the show, Len. Severe brain damage, well, moderate brain damage anyway, in the middle somewhere. Social services getting involved, the court of protection. Over to you, Len, regarding aerotoxicity. Really, it started all this roller coaster of a nightmare for you, and you've lost family, you've lost children, you've lost your life, really. Having said that, you're a fighter.
Thank you, Andy. It's been a long time since we've spoken, but my story, I went to work as a commercial pilot one day in November 1991, working for British Aerospace. And my colleague and I, Ian, we flew the aircraft from British Aerospace Hatfield to Prestwick. We stayed there during the day. Then as we departed on that evening, on takeoff, as we went down the runway, approaching 160 miles an hour, all of a sudden, the entire flight deck, or cockpit, filled with hot, very hot, acrid smoke. We were both blinded. We couldn't see where we were going. Ian felt his way across the control panel. I, who was the handling pilot, just judged I'll leave a few more seconds for the aircraft to accelerate. Then I pulled the aircraft gently into the air, but with no visibility, unable to see any controls. Fortunately, Ian managed to open a dump valve, which took all of the smoke out. And we continued. We executed an emergency landing back at Prestwick, an emergency evacuation of the aircraft. And on board that aircraft that day was Sir Charles Masefield, who was the managing director of British Aerospace commercial aircraft. So he witnessed firsthand what happened. The next day, 2 test pilots from British Aerospace went to Prestwick. The aircraft was brought back to the UK, to British Aerospace Hatfield, and within a very short period of time, possibly a month, it was exported to Russia together with all the paperwork. Ian and I completed what is known as an occurrence incident, detailing what happened. That form never reached the civil aviation, and the whole incident disappeared. What I didn't realize with these fume events, They have known since around about 1955 of the dangers of contaminated air on airplanes. The air you breathe on most commercial aircraft, with the exception now of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, the air comes through the jet engine. It is bled off into a compressor. Then it goes into the aircraft. There are no filters. The only filter is your lungs. Now, when a fume event occurs, what happens? Oil seals fail or they're severely weakened, and that oil gets into the air conditioning system, and that is what you breathe. And it's sometimes referred to as the asbestos of the sky, because within those oils, those hydrocarbons, are chemicals, including a tricresyl phosphate, which is an organophosphate-based compound, like sarin, the nerve gas, and Novichok. And it causes incredible damage to your nervous system. Over to you, Andy.
Yeah, I was going to say, so they actually, I didn't know this in the past, they actually covered up that fume event at that time.
Yes, they did, because of the cost to commercial aviation. If passengers knew what was occurring and the air they were breathing, there would be major questions held. In my case, after that fume event, I never felt quite right. I didn't know about contaminated air at that time, but I was getting onto aircraft and flying them. And as I advanced the powers to take off, I felt spaced out. And in fact, from then on, I always felt not quite right. But I looked at my colleagues and there was something wrong with them. These people have been former RAF, Royal Navy test pilots, instructors and examiners at the Empire Test Pilot School. But they were making fundamental mistakes and they were far more experienced than I am. I was thinking, why are they forgetting to level off? Why are they doing this? And I didn't realize they also possibly were suffering for the same effects as myself. But a man called Tristan Lorraine, who's made a lot of documentaries on contaminated air, he was a British Airways pilot. He was affected, and he actually brought it into the limelight. So a lot of people like myself and others then understood what was going on. And in fact, when I had testing, it was sent to America, Duke's University, South Carolina, Professor Abadonia, and the results were chemical-induced nervous system injury. I'd also been seen at the National Hospital for Neurology, Neurosurgery in Queen's Square, and tested by University College London by neuropsychologists. And I had brain injury, but the crunch came in 2012 when I was admitted to Derryford Hospital, the Southwest Regional Neurological Hospital, and I underwent testing over, I think it was 3 nights, 4 days, and they caught damage using EEGs to the central cortex part of my brain, which was causing me problems with memory and neurological absences. As far as I'm aware, I'm the only aircrew member in the United Kingdom who have had that test on the National Health Service. Other aircrew have gone abroad, I think Belgium and other countries. They've had the same test and we've all had the same results. But according to mental health nurses who tried to section me 3 years ago in Somerset, I am delusional about all of this. Back to you, Andy.
It's obvious, though, that when someone's been poisoned, they're going to be a bit, well, not crazy, but, forgetful for a little while. I mean, it's like the flu, I've currently got a bit of the flu, and to be fair, if that poison wasn't in me, I'd feel a lot better. So it's kind of similar. I'd like to bring attention just quickly to this thing I've got on screen. It's a petition, and it's currently running on change.org. If people would sign that, it would be appreciated. So it's change.org/p/stop contaminated cabin air in aircraft. Or just Google change.org stop contaminated cabin air in aircraft.
Sorry, I just think that was put online by a lady called Trudy Dad, who was an ex-British Airways crew member. She's also been poisoned. She's had the same test as I, and she has the same results. And we both have brain injury identity cards. What was interesting, about 10 years ago, within a very short time, that petition had reached about 130,000 people had signed it. And thereafter, the figures have never gone up. 100,000 people could sign that in the next month, but the figure will remain at 130,000. Why is that, Andy?
Very strange. We're being controlled, obviously.
Yes, we are.
I mean, another flume event. If people think, we're just making this up, this is all in the past. The Skyhawk jet crew. This is a headline on the 27th of December 24. Panic in the sky. Hawker jet crew battle smoke-filled cockpit. And this was, on December 24th, 2024, a Hawker departing Teterboro Airport, New Jersey, for Romania, Dominican, encountered a critical emergency shortly after takeoff during the initial climb. It seems, from what I've read, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, do these events only happen on the initial climb? Because it seems that there's a pattern here, because this one's very similar to yours. The pilots reported to smoke filling the cockpit on takeoff and so on.
No, you've got to remember, when you take off, the aircraft is at maximum power to take off. So the engines are up there working their hardest. But this particular fume event, it's the same aircraft, a more modern version of the Hawker Siddeley 125-800. So this is a more modern version. And what happened to those two crew is identical to what happened to me and my colleague Ian. But what those crew may not know is the effect those chemicals may have on them. And they will never know. They will just think, oh, it's just some smoke. But they won't be aware of what possible neurological damage that has caused to them. But I'm going to try and contact the crew, and I'll tell them to have the same tests, because what was done to me, I was accused of being mentally ill, and I was medicated till I lost mental capacity. And since 2004 to today, the 10th of February 2025, I have been held by the United Kingdom government legal services, particularly the official solicitor of the High Court, under Part 7 of the Mental Health Act, and my particular circumstances have never been disclosed to the Court of Protection. And a legal aid certificate was issued. It posed a substantial question to be answered by the Civil Court of Appeal. My case came before the most worshipful brother, His Honour Judge Simon Oliver. He decided he could stand as a Court of Appeal judge, and he decided he would hear the case when he was not authorised. But we'll go into that at a lot later detail and time. Back to you.
Yeah, so how long do you think it takes for people to know if they've had a reaction to the cockpit Right.
Well, first of all, you won't be aware of it. I mean, these organophosphates, they're everywhere. They're used in agriculture. They're used in chemical weapons. They were used in the Gulf War. Organophosphates are used in fire retardants. They're everywhere, and particularly in farming. But for some reason, there's a reluctance to diagnose anyone with organophosphate poisoning because of the compensation that could be paid. And of course, it's much easier to say, oh, that person's mentally ill. Don't take any notice of him. But I was very fortunate, having been medicated under government legal services for probably almost 1.5 years until I'd lost mental capacity. How could I escape? And it was virtually impossible. People came forward to help me. One was a man called Alistair Wilson. Alistair Wilson was the clinical director of the Royal London Hospital Accident and Emergency Department. He was the president of the European Associations of Trauma Surgeons and president of the British Trauma Society, and he was the co-founder of the London Air Ambulance based at the Royal London Hospital. He, together with a military doctor, who was a consultant anaesthetist, and 2 others, tried to rescue me from the official solicitor. There was a hearing at Slough County Court, and the judge, District Judge Falkang, in the presence of government legal services, refused my request that these people would be my next of kin. They were stopped from being so. Allegedly, they weren't suitable people. I don't think you could get any more suitable people. And then I was held. The lawyers from One King's Bench Walk, Dominic Brazil, Nicholas Allen, now KC from One Garden Court, and others set about asset stripping me and taking as much money as possible. But there was nothing I could do because I was medicated and it was very hard for me to talk. I'd been drugged with olanzapine, sodium valproate, zopiclone. But what was interesting, Andy, whilst I was being held by government legal, and Dr. Royds, a consultant psychiatrist, I was sent by the Independent Pilots Association on behalf of the Australian Pilots Association a video, and they'd made a DVD all about contaminated air. And I handed that to the consultant psychiatrist, Dr. Royds, told him what I believed was wrong with me. And I think 2 years later, the DVD was returned to me. It hadn't even been opened. And the psychiatrist hadn't viewed it. He diagnosed me as having bipolar. Fortunately, I escaped. I went to the Civil Aviation Authority, and I saw the medical officer at London Heathrow, told him what was happening. He spoke to the Chief Civil Aviation Authority medical officer, Dr. Sally Evans, and they directed me to BALPA, the British Airline Pilots Association, who then directed me to Wing Commander Professor Gordon Turnbull, who had trained both in neurology and in psychiatry, and is one of the world's leading expert on post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a diagnosis I have, which has its origins in the Royal Navy. And the first thing Professor Turnbull did was to stop all the psychiatric medication I'd been given, and my presentation became a lot more alert. The government legal services were very unhappy that I got access to a different psychiatrist, and within, I think, 5 hours of what's it called, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, with a psychologist who had trained in neuropsychology. That's Professor Turnbull in neuropsychology, I think at Great Ormond Street. Her name was Julia. She was working under Professor Turnbull. She said, after 5 hours of treatment, she said, "You have a brain injury." And she took me from her office to Professor Turnbull. And he then, I got arranged to go and have neurological testing, and University College Hospital London and the National Hospital for Neurology. And surprise, the testing suggested I had an organic cause for my testing, for my brain injury. I went, the British Airline Pilots Association rep, Captain Tristan Moraine, contacted me. I and 26 other crew blood tests done and tested in America by Professor Abadonia, a world expert in organophosphates at Duke's University. And our results all came back. Chemical-induced nervous system injury suggests the presence of moderate brain damage. Had it not been for Turnbull, I would have been dead. But fortunately, he saved my life. But the chance of people getting to Professor Turnbull are very remote. Back to you.
It looks like you had a good colleague as well, that lady who...
Yeah, Julia Vaughan, she was very good, yeah. But my recent diagnosis from Somerset NHS Foundation Trust mental health nurses that I'm delusional, I'm seriously mentally ill. They did try to section me, to silence me 3 years ago. They put everything on my medical records. I assaulted my wife and children. I threatened the public, delusional about the call to protection, delusional about organophosphate. They absolutely trashed me. And within a short period, over 120 people associated with Somerset NHS Trust entered my medical records, and they had a field day. Fortunately, the chief medical officer, Professor Marion, who was a consultant psychiatrist, together with a Dr. Upperday, another consultant psychiatrist, didn't buy into what mental health nurses were saying. Anyway, we'll go into that in a much more detail later, and I will give you the comments, what they've made against me. But Turnbull was absolutely brilliant. He rescued me. But like I say, there will be so many people who will not get to him.
And there'll be so many people even now that...
Well, by myself...
I was going to say that they'll just think that what's wrong with them is a mental health problem or stress of work.
Yeah,
they won't actually know they're poisoned.
No, passengers don't know they're poisoned. They don't know, and that is the problem. Where Captain Tristan Lorraine, I think I've sent you his educational video on aircraft toxic contaminated air. And he said it can be used for educational purposes, and that's what's the purpose of these videos. And people don't know. Like I say, the industry knows. They know since 1955 of the damages, but they're just not telling the public. But by myself and there's a lot of other crew who are speaking out, not only in the United Kingdom, but other countries. Hopefully the public will have a lot greater understanding. And more recently, it's come to light that military helicopter pilots and air crew, like navigators and winchmen, in the Army, Navy and Air Force, they also are being affected by toxic fumes. Slightly different to the fumes that I have been contaminated by, i.e. bleed air from the engines. They've been affected by the exhaust gases on helicopters, and a few have died, and others are all riddled with cancerous tumours. I've sent you the link to that, and We can always go into that much greater. So why is it all being covered up? Because the longer they can cover it up, the longer they can stop paying compensation. So it'll pass from government to government to government. One of the most appalling things which was done around about 2012, the government commissioned, it was a Tory government, commissioned Cranfield University to conduct testing on contaminated air, toxic poison airs on aircraft. And I think the aircraft they used was the Boeing 757, which was one of the aircrafts I used to fly. And they concluded their investigations, and they couldn't find any evidence of contaminated air. And that findings from Cranfield University was submitted to the Secretary of State for Transport. I believe her name, she was Teresa Villas, and that was submitted in Parliament. So they hadn't found any problems. What was interesting, I got leaked the peer reviews into that testing at Cranfield by Professor Harrison and Professor Jackson, who were two independent professors who reviewed the morphology, how Cranfield had conducted the testing. And the equipment used for this test wasn't suitable to detect the chemicals. That's why they didn't find them. And where the sensors were placed, they were placed on the floor, not where the air vents were. So that's how it was all covered up. And that's gone very quiet. Apparently all the files have been destroyed. My colleagues still have the peer review results. So they knew, but it carried on. Anyway, back to you, Andy.
Well, as a passenger, and I've been flying a lot last 2 or 3 years. When I first started flying, though, before that, about 10, 15 years ago, there was always this, I call it a petrol smell, or this musty, petrol-y smell on an aircraft. And you think, well, that's kind of normal. At the time, I thought it was quite kind of normal. Then I got off the aircraft, I had a few headaches, and I just put it down to tired and traveling. But I think it's that type of smell that you've got to look out for, because I've just come back from Turkey only last week now, and the cabin smell is different these days on most aircraft. So it's possible that they're trying to get rid of it, but it's...
No, they're not. The most safest aircraft to fly is the 787 Dreamliner. That's replaced the jumbo jets crossing the Atlantic and on long-haul routes. That no longer takes the air from the jet engine. It takes the air from electrical compressors on the wing, so there's no risk of the oil from the engines getting into the air conditioning system and getting into the cabin. So that's how they're doing it now. But the other aircraft, like the A330, the Airbuses, they all still take the air through the jet engine. If there's any seal leaks or failures, and that oil is getting into the cabin. And you only need one fume event. You don't need more than that. You can have what I have, but there's also low level exposure. But again, when people see the links on your aircraft, on your video now, it will give them a much greater understanding. Back to you.
There's so much on this. I don't know where to start. Yeah, but as a passenger, like I said, I did notice the smell years ago. I always wondered what that was.
The smell is sometimes referred to as wet socks. How can I describe the smell? It just, I don't know, it's a smell you kept sniffing because you're trying to work out what it was. But again, there's a lot of other ways the air in an aircraft can become contaminated. those sprays they used to use before you landed in certain country, they used to come along the cabin spraying aerosols to kill any flies or mosquitoes. That contained organophosphates. When you de-ice, those chemicals, that can be poured in if the APU is running. Unfortunately, they're everywhere, but trying to get the diagnosis is doctors are silenced. If they start to speak out, like Dr. Myhill and Dr. Munro and others, they find themselves under a fitness to practice investigation by the General Medical Council, and they encounter problems. And in my case, when I'd seen a Dr. Susan Bradbury, I gave her a DVD which I'd had from Dr. Rice, the consultant psychiatrist at Signet Healthcare, never viewed. I gave it to this Dr. Bradbury, I think where was it? I think it was Leeds. And she said, "How do you know Dr. Royce hasn't viewed, the consultant psychiatrist, hasn't viewed this DVD about this contaminated air?" I said, "Look, it's still in its sealed container. It hasn't been opened." And she looked at the seal, she broke the seal, and she said, "There's no evidence now, Mr. Lawrence, that he hasn't viewed it." But there was. And she signed a statement that she had no association with Signet Healthcare. I'd seen her at the Nuffield Hospital. No, it was in York, I think, sorry, in York. She had no association with Signet Healthcare. I found out that she was the medical director of Signet Healthcare in Harrogate. So she did have an association. But trying to go through the GMC and all that, you're sent on a round robin and you don't get anywhere. It's all covered up. But when people like me come together with other people, then you start to and like I say, journalists like you, it becomes more prevalent. And I hope the next few shows I do with you, what I've been through, many other people won't have to suffer. And like I say, the most vicious thing that I've ever encountered was not in the military. It was in an Avon and Somerset Police Custody Centre when the police set 3 mental health nurses on me from Somerset NHS to try and section me. And they were evil, absolutely evil. But like I say, we will deal with that later. But back to aerotoxic and back to you, Andy.
Yeah, so there's obviously, well, you've already confirmed now, there's not really any solution then. So,
well, there is a solution.
It's scary as a passenger, though, you know, knowing that could happen to you. I mean, we've had pilots complaining. I mean, I found an email here from, where's it gone? An American Airlines crew member that sent you an email talking about, you know, she used to take notes. She complained to the industry. Nobody listened. It's about Captain David Hill and his crew. Among them was Kimberly. And the message to you, though, which I thought was sweet, to Leonard Lawrence, they may have taken literally everything from you, but they couldn't take your voice. This will encourage you and others to keep fighting. You're always in our prayers. And the many more who know personally that aerotoxic poisoning is real. I'm grateful to have had your care and support and understanding throughout my difficult time. So it's definitely real. There's real people out there, but there's no solution.
Well, there is. Like I say, the 787 Dreamliner no longer takes air from the engines. It takes it from, so that is the solution. There are masks you can wear if there is a fume event, but they're not totally effective, but they do provide a degree of protection. What the passengers don't know, when there is a fume event, the pilots have 100% oxygen available to them on the flight deck. So they, as long as they recognize what's going on and put the mask on very quickly, they're okay. When these oxygen masks fall in the aircraft cabin, they are not oxygen. So because if there was a fire, it would accelerate it. They are recirculated cabin air. So don't think by dropping the oxygen masks, it's going to save you. Not at all.
Wow.
Now, organophosphates were used in the Gulf War. They know how to find the damage these chemicals do. But in aviation, it's getting to the right doctor, getting the right tests. We know the EEGs will find damage in the central cortex of the brain, which was found at Derry Hospital with myself. But that was withheld from me, Andy, since 2012. I only got to see it last year. And as a consequence of that, I've put my medical records up online. I can't do it because I don't have the IT skills, but other people have. But you try asking for that test. It's highly unlikely that you will get that test in the UK. You will have to go to Belgium. I think it's Daniel Dunne, but that information could be made available to you. But
are these people been any good? The Aerotoxic Association.
Aerotoxic Association. It was formed by John Hoyt, primarily, and others, and it's done a lot of good work. John accompanied me to court, actually, when my case came before His Honour Justice Simon Oliver at Reading County Court, but he wouldn't allow John Hoyt into court at all. And what unfolded in that courtroom, we'll deal with that at a later date. Yes, but John wrote a book, actually, and the book he wrote was Aerotoxic Syndrome, Aviation's Darkest Secret. You can buy it online. If I show it to you now, can you see it? There we are. Here's the book.
I'll find it.
I got it here. But what is very interesting about this book, if you look on page 210, this is the post-mortem of a British Airways pilot who died of the same injuries that I have. That was his post-mortem. The brain damage was there and evident to see. Right, back to you.
No, God, it's scary, isn't it?
Well, we got a much greater understanding of it now, and it's become increasingly more difficult to cover it up. It's not a mental health issue. There was a BALPA conference, I think it was around about 2007, 6, 7 or 8, and it was held in London, and it was absolutely brilliant. And one of the things I think Jim Coulson, who was the chairman of BALPA, what he said was, we know about the damage it's doing to pilots and crew and passengers, but what about the damage it causes to the unborn child? So if a woman goes on an aircraft and she's pregnant and she gets contaminated, then what damage will this cause to her children?
Well, yeah.
We'll find that video and it can be put up. But again, the biggest fight you will have when you get poisoned like me is it's very easy to give you the mental health diagnosis and say, oh, you're mentally ill, you're delusional, rather than giving you the the testing, which shows you have brain damage. And life is very, very different with a diagnosis of brain injury to one of mental health diagnosis of bipolar or schizophrenia or whatever. I was fortunate a few months ago, be it at a lawyer's office in London, when I had the opportunity to speak with a consultant neuropsychiatrist from a major London teaching hospital. I was talking to him how neuropsychology had rescued me from the mental health system, and having a neurological diagnosis is very different to having one of mental illness, how you're treated. I had over, I think it's more, between 10 to 12 years under the care of the specialist brain injury organisation. And that involved consultant neuropsychologists coming to my house unannounced, doing spot checks, coming on planned visits. I had 24-hour emergency cover from neuropsychologists, consultant neuropsychologists. I had that available to me. Surprise, surprise. One day, all the neuro rehabilitation facilities available to people in the Southwest was redrawn. So there was no more neuro rehabilitation. And once that protective umbrella was removed from me, then I get attacked by Thames Valley Police, Avon Somerset Police, and Avon Somerset Mental Health System, with the intention of trying to section me and silence me. Yet throughout that 10, 12-year period I had, no one came near me because I had a protective umbrella. That's the reality of what's going on in this country. Now I'm going to write. I've said to the consultant neuropsychiatrist said to me, would I do a summary, maybe 3 pages, 4 pages of A4, how neuropsychiatry had rescued me in the mental health system. So we're going to be working on that shortly with help. Then I will let you have a copy. But there are, so people understand, there's 2 types of psychologist, a psychologist and a neuropsychologist. They're very different. A psychologist will treat you for, say, trauma. They will be PTSD, depression, but they won't look deep into any physical damage to your brain. A neuropsychologist will do that. They will look at what's causing you to have problems. In my case, it was later found that I was having neurological absences. So they could last a second, a microsecond, or maybe for a few minutes. So you lose total awareness of what you were doing. So when I was doing neurological testing, I'd get so far, I'd back out and I'd start again. And the neuropsychologist couldn't work out why I was taking so long to complete tests. And it was only when I got into Derriford and had a specialist test that we found it. Now, a psychiatrist, again, deals with maybe PTSD. They will deal with schizophrenia, bipolar, but they won't deal with neurological problems. A neuropsychiatrist trains both in neurology and in psychiatry, so they combine both their skills in neurology and psychiatry. So while you have you're presenting in a particular way, you may have an underlying neurological condition with a psychological overlay, and that's what was happening in my case. I had an underlying neurological condition, but because of the way I was treated by government legal services and lawyers, when I was very vulnerable, I'd had a psychological overlay of trauma. And but what Professor Turnbull did, he identified the problem, and then he separated both the psychological overlay and the neurological underlay of brain injury. And that's how I was rescued from the mental health system. But very, very few people are going to get that access, let alone knowing how to access it. Back to you.
I think you can talk a little bit about, just to sort of end the show at the top of there. Talk a little bit about, you. Obviously, you're going to go into more detail, about losing your job, losing your family, the house, having the family put against you. I mean, that's part of this, and then another show will move on to the family courts after that. But
we'll do the family courts maybe next, because that's where it is. But anyway, what happened? I went to work in that was it November 91, and I came home that night and I wasn't quite right. And over the period of time, I was having problems with absences, not full aware, being clumsy, shall I say, leaving things out, leaving the fridge door open, little things like that, which is a commercial airline pilot. And especially the type of flying I was doing, I was flying the present king, I flew him, the former prime minister of this country, the Irish Taoiseach. So I was in a very high profile position where I was being constantly monitored and assessed. And anyway, I had another fume event and I had to give up flying for a time, because I just didn't know what was going on. But in the meantime, my ex-wife had noticed what was going on, and she set about divorcing me and getting me to put children in private school, getting me to build a big extension on the house and things like that. Then all of a sudden I get served with a divorce from my wife. Now, at a conference in London at Irwin Mitchell Solicitors in Holborn, there was a consultant, I think he was a neuropsychologist. He talks about people with brain injury, and what he said, 70% of people with brain injury are divorced by their spouse, because, to be blunt, who wants to be married to a cripple? And that also goes for women. Women who suffer brain injury, they also can be divorced by their spouse. We've got a lot of cabin crew out there, and they're not the people they used to be. They've been affected. So it's not a gender issue, it's both. And when these divorces happen, they happen very rapidly. All of a sudden, one makes a very serious allegation, and you find out, in my case, I was accused of assaulting my children and my wife. And all of a sudden, the police raid you, your house, you're taken to court. Then the spouse, unknown to you, runs to court for a non-molestation order to get you evicted from the house. And that's what happened to me. And you just don't know what's going on. Fortunately, the judge didn't buy into this. And later my wife was told to leave the house. But I wasn't well enough to defend myself. And I had constant allegations being made against me, having to keep diaries where I was and everything else. And it wears you down. But what my wife's solicitor and barrister did was evil. The barrister was a man called Dominic Brazil, 1 King's Bench Walk Chambers. And what I didn't know, Dominic Brazil and a solicitor from BP Collins called Graham Stephen Fraser, they managed to get me certified without a medical by Dr. Jeremy Rise from Signet Healthcare, when a locum consultant psychiatrist from the NHS said my cognition was grossly intact. What happened? All of a sudden, certified, placed under the official solicitor of the High Court, and no one was allowed near me, and I'd had no control over my affairs, including my assets. And what I never knew, that Helen Mary Cliff, in the office of the official solicitor, who was recently appointed a few months ago as the deputy official solicitor, had worked in Reading, where, according to records, she had briefed my wife's barrister. So my wife's barrister gets me certified, handed to Helen Cliff in the official solicitor's office, where she's now working, and she allowed Dominic Brazil, Graham Stephen Fraser and others to take just about most of the things I had, sell my house, my belongings, asset strip me, absolutely asset strip me. And that took place in 2005. If I dared to go to court when the final hearing took place in April 2005, they were going to section me under them in a secure mental health unit, so I couldn't go to court. When I did go to court in August 2005, district judge, we now know wasn't authorised to conduct quarter protection cases, and would not allow me to be released from the official solicitor. Yet the man had no duty and no power to hold me. But anyway, we'll go into a lot more of this later. But it would have happened to a lot other people. But like I say, I was rescued by Professor Turnbull and Captain Christian Lorraine, British Airways pilot, who's done so much, together with Captain Sulan Michaelis, who's an Australian pilot, to bring this to the forefront of what's going on now. You had the DVD, Welcome Aboard Toxic Airlines. You look at these people, the aircraft, that's a picture of me in an aircraft. The one on the right with the things on my head, that's me in Derriford Hospital in 2012, around about April, and under the care of consultant neurologists. And as a result of that testing, they found the brain damage in the central cortex of my brain. But only in 2024 have I managed to get access to those medical records, and you'll see them online. And in fact, a lot happened in 2004 when the government legal services, Thames Valley Police, Avon and Somerset Police, and particularly Somerset NHS mental health nurses attacked me viciously. 2023 into 2024. Sorry, they attacked me in 22. In 2023, 24. A lot of people who have been holding my records and would not disclose them to me did actually disclose. Crown Prosecution Service stepped in London because Thames Valley Police would not give me the evidence which would clear me from beating up my wife and children. One of the allegations made against me by the mental health nurses. Thames Valley would give me the evidence to clear me. The Chief Constables, Chief Constable, was it Campbell, and more recently Chief Constable Hogg, Jason Hogg. The Crown Prosecution Service London stepped in and they said, we have no records whatsoever of any assaults by you on your family. So why wouldn't the police give me that evidence? Like I say, I will release that letter from the Crown Prosecution Service. Another very interesting letter that came from me was the Court of Appeal. And it's Mr. Lawrence, Master Bancroft Rimmer, does not and never has been a judge of the Court of Protection. Now, in 2013, the Worshipful Brother, Berkshire Freemasonry, his Honour Judge Simon Oliver, had been told to send my case to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal had contacted Oliver and said they can't deal with me. It has to go to a High Court family judge on the Court of Protection. Oliver was having none of that. He sent a handwritten instructions to Master Bancroft in the Civil Court of Appeal to make sure that my appeal failed. And now we have it that she was never a Court of Protection judge. We now know she returned it to Simon Oliver where he continued when he wasn't authorised. That's been confirmed by the Judicial Office for England and Wales, and it's also been confirmed by the Court of Protection. His Honour Judge Oliver was conducting Court of Protection cases when he weren't authorised to deal with them, and his Honour Judge Simon Oliver, again, was central, together with some within Freemasonry, in 2022 to have me sectioned and attack me on multiple false allegations. Fortunately, people have stepped in to help me and support me, including Freemasons of various levels. So, like I said, we've opened up a hornet's nest, really, but you find there's a lot of other people who have been down this same route, where they've had mental health used against them to silence them as whistleblowers, not only in this country, but in other countries. In America, a lot of pilots have been under attack with mental health to discredit them. It's such an easy option. But trying to get to the right mental health, like I say, I was very lucky with the two psychiatrists, the Professor Daniel Marion, who was the Chief Medical Officer and Consultant Psychiatrist of Somerset NHS Trust. He didn't buy into these allegations that I was mentally ill, so he was brilliant, and he stopped all access to my medical records. And the other consultant psychiatrist, Dr. Upperday from Somerset NHS, he actually wrote, "Why, if Mr. Lawrence is so mentally ill, hasn't he seen a doctor in the last year?" And again, he was a fantastic doctor, but they both left the trust. They've gone. The man on screen, Basil Yahari Yoxall, a most unpleasant individual. I was in his courtroom in the Queen's Bench. I've been given permission to sue the official solicitor of the High Court for damages for $500,000 by 3 High Court masters. We got into the courtroom, and the then deputy official solicitor, May Morn, was there, and she said, "Yes, Mr. Lawrence has been poisoned. He's lost his home and his assets. So what?" She said, "I want the case struck out." And Yoxall then said, in the Queen's Bench division, now the King's Bench, "Do you want to make him bankrupt?" And I said, "Oh, Master Yoxall, I've forgotten to turn my phone off. Everything you're saying is going to the press outside." At which point the deputy official solicitor said, no, we don't want costs. And they didn't know what to do. So I appealed against it. And the case got sent to one Lord Justice Adrian Fulford. Mr. Justice Adrian Fulford. Later, Lord Justice Adrian Fulford. There he is. And without a hearing, Fulford shut my refused me permission to appeal. Yet the same day, or the day earlier, Mrs. Justice Palfrey, who was equivalent to Fulford, but in the Queen's Bench division, in the family division, she ordered that my case had to go to the Court of Appeal. This is what you come up against. And yes, the website's there. I've put these things online. Not one of these judges has attempted to sue me. They've got some unpleasant history, but I won't go into that on your program now. But anyway, that's basically the aerotoxic. It's still going on. People are still being poisonous, including passengers. And but they now need to be aware when they suffer a fume event, what they need to do. They can always contact me through you or through anyone else. And by putting my details online, then hopefully they will have a much greater understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Freedom Talk Radio 2013@gmail.com. The website, freedomtalkradioonline.com. Live shows is where you can donate a coffee or you can just comment on the shows. We'll be back next time. It's good to see you, Len. And if you have